In the spring of 1984, on a flat expanse of land that had been the bottom of the sea only a few years earlier, a Dutch ecologist named Frans Vera watched a small herd of stocky, gray, wild-looking horses trot down a ramp and out onto the open ground and let them go. There were 18 of them, a primitive breed called the Konik, brought in from Poland because they were thought to be the closest living echo of the wild horses that had roamed Europe before civilization. Squat and muscular, with dun-gray coats and dark stripes down their spine, they looked less like modern horses than like the animals painted on the walls of Ice Age cave. Vera did not plan to feed them. He did not plan to shelter them, or medicate them, or manage them in any way at all. When the snows came and the grass vanished, there would be no hay, no barn, no rescue. When an animal fell sick, there would be no veterinarian. He was going to do something almost no one in modern Europe had ever dared to try. He was going to release these animals into a fenced wilderness and then step back completely and let nature, raw and unsupervised, decide what happened next, however hard that turned out to be. It was one of the boldest ecological experiments of the 20th century, an attempt to build a piece of prehistoric Europe from scratch on reclaimed farmland outside Amsterdam, not to plant a garden or manage a park, but to rebuild an entire lost ecosystem, and then to hand it the keys and walk away. And for a while, it looked like a triumph. The horses thrived, the land came alive, herds spread across the open plains, birds filled the skies, and visitors stood at the edge of the reserve, scarcely able to believe they were still in the crowded, orderly Netherlands. Vera's radical vision seemed to be vindicated before the eyes of the world. But 3 decades later, that same wilderness would become the site of one of the most bitter and divisive conservation disasters in European history. A place of mass death, riot police, and death threats, where the public watched animals starve and turned on the very man who had set them free. This is the story of what happens when you try to build a wilderness and discover that nature does not care about your plans. But before the disaster, there was the dream. And to understand how it all went so wrong, you first have to understand how astonishingly right it seemed to go. Because for the first 2 decades, almost everything Vera predicted came true, and the doubters were silenced one by one. To see why Vera did something so radical, you have to understand where this land came from, because the ground those horses stepped onto should not have existed at all. It was called the Oostvaardersplassen, a stretch of low, marshy country in the province of Flevoland, and just years before, it had been underwater. For centuries, the Dutch had been engaged in an epic struggle with the sea, walling off the ocean with dikes and pumping the water out to create new land, until nearly a third of the entire country lay below sea level, kept dry only by human effort. It is one of the great engineering feats in human history, an entire nation partly built by hand from the seabed up. And in the 1960s, they drained a vast new polder from the old Zuiderzee, the inland sea that had once cut deep into the heart of the Netherlands. This particular corner, some 56 square kilometers of it, an area larger than many cities, had been earmarked for factories, docks, and industry, the engine of a modern economy rising from the drained ocean floor. But then, the oil crisis of the 1970s struck, the global economy faltered, the industrial plans collapsed, and the land was simply left, abandoned, and empty. An enormous blank slate of bare mud and shallow water to do as it pleased. And what it did surprised everyone. Wild greylag geese discovered the flooded, reedy ground and descended on it in enormous numbers, tens of thousands of them. And as they grazed and trampled and tore up the reeds to feed, they reshaped the marsh into a patchwork of open water and wet grassland that drew in an astonishing variety of birds. Rare species that had all but vanished from the crowded Netherlands began to appear here. Spoonbills and bitterns, marsh harriers and kingfishers, great flocks wheeling over water that had been dry land only years before. Almost by accident, a wasteland meant for warehouses had become one of the richest wetlands in all of Europe, so important that it would eventually be recognized under international treaty as a wetland of global significance. It was Vera who saw what the geese were really doing. He watched those birds engineer an entire landscape simply by grazing, opening up the reeds, creating the conditions for a whole community of other creatures to move in. And it crystallized an idea that had been forming in his mind, an idea that ran directly against the accepted wisdom of his entire field. If geese could shape a marsh, what could bigger animals do to the land? It was a question that would consume the rest of his career and eventually make him one of the most celebrated and most reviled figures in European conservation. But the geese alone could not hold back what was coming next, and Vera knew it. Along the drier edges of the reserve, willow seedlings were sprouting in staggering density. Hundreds of them on every single square meter of bare ground, a green fuzz that would harden year by year into thickets and then into forest. If nothing stopped them, the whole open landscape, so precious to the birds, would vanish under dense, closing woodland within a generation, and the miracle wetland would strangle itself. Everything the accident of the geese had built would be undone. The rare birds would leave, and the reserve would become just another patch of ordinary scrub. The clock was ticking and the willows were winning. The conventional solution would have been to send in machines and work crews to cut the willows back endlessly, year after year, forever, at enormous cost. Vera proposed something else entirely. If large grazing animals had once shaped the wild landscapes of prehistoric Europe, keeping the forest in check with their appetites, then perhaps they could do the same here, for free, if only someone had the courage to bring them back. It was a strange and audacious thought, to solve a modern conservation problem not with machinery or management, but by importing the ecological ghosts of animals that had been dead or domesticated for thousands of years, and then trusting them to run the landscape themselves. Almost no one believed it would work. If a story about one man's attempt to resurrect a lost wilderness and the reckoning that followed is worth your time, take a moment to subscribe, because what began as a beautiful idea would curdle into something almost no one saw coming. Vera's idea struck at the heart of a deeply held belief about the natural world. For generations, ecologists had assumed that if you left the land of Northern Europe entirely alone, it would inevitably return to one thing: dense, closed forest, a continuous canopy stretching from horizon to horizon. That was thought to be nature's default, the endpoint every wild landscape marched toward. Vera disagreed, and he disagreed profoundly. He argued that this picture was wrong, that prehistoric Europe had not been an unbroken forest at all, but a shifting, dynamic mosaic of open grassland, scattered trees, and grazed parkland, and that the thing which had kept it open for hundreds of thousands of years was the great herds of wild herbivores, the aurochs, the wild horse, the red deer, the bison, animals whose ceaseless grazing had held the forest at bay and created a rich, varied, sunlit landscape. Those great grazing herds were mostly gone now, hunted to extinction, or domesticated into farm animals. But Vera believed their ecological ghosts could be summoned back using the closest living substitutes he could find. For the vanished wild horse, he chose the Konik, a small, hardy Polish breed. For the extinct aurochs, that mighty wild ox of prehistoric Europe, he chose Heck cattle, a controversial breed that had been created decades earlier in Germany, in the 1920s and 30s, by two brothers who tried to breed a living aurochs back into existence from domestic cattle. And he added red deer, brought in from Scotland and Central Europe, huge animals to play the part of the wild deer that had always roamed these lands. Beginning in the 1980s, the animals arrived: 18 Konik horses, 32 Heck cattle, and later dozens of red deer released into the reserve to begin their work. And at the center of it all was one uncompromising principle, the thing that made the Oostvaardersplassen unlike almost any other nature reserve on Earth, and that would ultimately tear it apart: non-intervention. Vera wanted to see what nature would do if humans truly kept their hands off. No feeding, not even in the harshest winter. No veterinary care, no culling, no breeding programs. The animals would live and die entirely on their own terms, as wild animals do, and whatever emerged would be genuine, self-willed nature. For years it seemed to work beautifully. Freed on the rich grassland with no predators and no limits, the herds flourished and multiplied. The 18 horses became many dozens, then hundreds. The cattle and deer boomed alongside them. Visitors came to gaze across a landscape that looked impossibly like the African Serengeti, transplanted to the cold flatlands of the Netherlands. Great herds of horses and cattle and deer, grazing across open plains within sight of Amsterdam suburbs. Conservationists from around the world came to study it. The Oostvaardersplassen became famous, a living proof of concept for a bold new philosophy that was just beginning to acquire a name: rewilding, the idea of stepping back and letting nature reassert itself. Vera's vision, once heresy, looked like the future. But the very success of the experiment carried the seed of its undoing, and the mechanism was brutally simple. In a truly wild ecosystem, the great grazing herds are held in check by two forces: predators that hunt them, and the freedom to migrate away when food runs short. The Oostvaardersplassen had neither. It had no wolves, no large predators of any kind to thin the herds. And it was a fenced island, ringed by dikes and railways and cities, with nowhere for the animals to go. So the populations climbed and climbed, unchecked, until there were far more grazers than the land could possibly feed. And then came winter. With the grass gone and the herds swollen to thousands of animals, the only thing left to check their numbers was the one force Vera had always said would regulate them: starvation. As the cold set in and the food ran out, the weakest animals began to die, slowly, of hunger, out in the open where anyone driving past on the nearby motorway could see them. Emaciated horses with their ribs showing through their winter coats, collapsing deer, cattle too weak to lift themselves from the frozen mud. Each winter became a grim cull by cold and hunger, and in some years the losses were staggering, with reports of the herds shrinking by a third or more before spring arrived. To Vera and his allies, this was simply nature taking its course, the same hard arithmetic that governs every wild population on Earth, from the wildebeest of the Serengeti to the deer of any unmanaged forest. Unpleasant to witness, but honest and real. Animals are born, they compete for food, and when there is not enough, the weakest die. And that, he argued, is not cruelty. It is simply how a wild system finds its balance. To the Dutch public, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like cruelty. It looked like thousands of helpless animals being left to slowly waste away and die in a government-run reserve. And the outrage, when it came, was volcanic. The breaking point arrived in the winter of 2017 and 2018. That winter was long and wet and bitterly cold, and the animals died in staggering numbers. Of the roughly 5,200 large grazers in the reserve, close to 3,000 died or were shot before the spring. More than half the entire population gone in a single season. To prevent the very worst of the suffering, rangers moved through the reserve shooting the weakest animals before they could starve to death. And the images of that culling, of horses and deer being put down by the hundred, spread across the country and ignited a firestorm. Protesters gathered at the gates. Activists hurled bales of hay over the fences to feed the starving animals, defying the non-intervention rule. And when the authorities tried to stop them, riot police were called in and arrests were made. The rage found a target in Franz Vera himself. He was compared to Hitler. He received death threats. People threatened his grandchildren. A vision that had begun as an act of ecological hope had become, in the public eye, a symbol of heartless cruelty, and the man behind it became one of the most hated figures in Dutch conservation. The government could not withstand the storm. In 2018, the province appointed a committee to review the whole experiment, and its conclusion marked the end of Vera's dream. The era of non-intervention was over. From now on, the Oostvaardersplassen would be actively managed, its herds kept down to a fixed, sustainable number by regular culling throughout the year, so that mass starvation could never happen again. And the Konik horses, the very animals that had started it all, the living symbols of the whole experiment, were to be removed from the reserve entirely and relocated elsewhere. The wilderness experiment, in its purest and most radical form, was finished. To this day, The Oostvaardersplassen remains one of the most fiercely debated places in all of conservation. To its critics, it was a catastrophe from the start, an artificial pen where animals were doomed to starve because it lacked the two things every real wild ecosystem needs: predators and room to roam. To its defenders, including Vera, who was eventually pushed out of any role in the reserve he had created, the experiment was cut down before it could ever be fairly judged, ended not by ecological failure but by human squeamishness, by a public that could not bear to watch nature behave the way nature actually behaves. It comes back to that spring day in 1984, and those 18 horses trotting out onto the drained seabed into what everyone believed would be a new kind of paradise. Vera had wanted to prove that if we simply stepped back, nature could run itself, that we could rebuild a lost wild world and then have the humility to leave it alone. What the Oostvaardersplassen revealed instead was something more uncomfortable: that a wilderness with fences is not truly wild, that we cannot summon back a fragment of the ancient world without also summoning back its harshness, and that perhaps the hardest part of letting nature take its course is not the doing, but the watching. The horses are gone from those plains now, but the questions they left behind about how much control we are willing to surrender and how much wildness we can actually bear to live beside are only becoming more urgent as the rest of the world begins, cautiously, to rewild. And if you want more true stories like this one, where a bold attempt to heal the natural world collides with truths we did not expect, subscribe, and the next one will be waiting for you.